During the Second World War, Taiwan and its islands were ruled over by Japan. After the fallen empire's surrender, control was taken back by China. For the Taiwanese people, a new age of terror was about to unfold.
Chiang Kai-shek became the leader of China in 1928. But in 1949, following the Chinese Civil War, he and his Nationalist Party were defeated by the communist forces under the leadership of Mao Zedong.
And Chiang Kai-shek takes his government, which used to govern all of China, across to the island of Taiwan, 80 miles from the Chinese mainland.
Forced into exile, the deposed leader plotted to reclaim China from the newly installed communist government. And Green Island would come to play a key role in Chiang Kai-shek's plans.
As you look around, you see all these propaganda messages, one of which reads, "Be firm against communism and ready to win."
All this propaganda and the barrack-like buildings make you think it's some kind of military training facility.
However, this was not a place to house his army. It was designed to destroy his rivals.
Chiang Kai-shek is beleaguered by political enemies inside Taiwan. The old locals who resent the intrusion of these mainlanders onto their island, but also lots of Chinese spies inside the nationalist movement.
In a desperate attempt to cling to power, he rounds up those believed to be a threat. Lin Xiaowei lives on Green Island and grew up hearing the terrible stories from this time.
The people's right to freedom of speech and freedom to gather together was stripped away. For example, if 3 people got together, they would be accused of joining a trade union organization.
This period of brutal martial law became known as the White Terror.
Chiang Kai-shek creates this Green Island as a place where he can send people for interrogation and detention as he launches this so-called White Terror.
This was the New Life Correction Center. Locked inside, however, was not the typical cast of criminals. Here, the ones being persecuted were those with the power to influence others not through violence, but through reason. The treatment of the inmates here was brutal, to say the least. And for one individual, their story of survival would help alter the course of Taiwan forever. In the early 1950s, the first prison on Green Island was opened. It was a place where enemies of the state were sent for incarceration, interrogation, and torture. But those confined here were not the usual breed of criminal.
This wasn't a normal prison full of hardened and violent criminals. Instead, you had scholars and writers, poets and artists.
As we know, nothing is more dangerous than an idea. Those deemed to be the most dangerous for the most dangerous ideas, they were sent to Green Island, isolated from the rest of the population, where even the power of their poetry, the power of their art, couldn't reach anyone.
In time, some of these prisoners would transform Taiwan into the country it is today. But while caged, they endured unimaginable hardship.
The main building is a strange hexagonal structure with 4 lines of prisoner cells extending out from the core. Hard labor and torture were daily occurrences too. For a start, each prisoner had a sleeping space only 2 foot wide.
This wasn't just a prison. It was a re-education center, really an ideological brainwashing center as well. And the methods used were very extreme, to the point at which some prisoners were tattooed with propaganda slogans like "Oppose communism, resist the Russians."
While those locked inside would have dreamt of escape, the site's position meant this was nigh on impossible.
There were reports of political prisoners who attempted to escape, but they all failed. Why? Because Green Island is surrounded by the sea.
Known as the Black Current, the powerful waters that encircle the island pull flotsam back to the shore. It's rumored one desperate prisoner swam all night towards the mainland, only to find himself back where he started as the sun rose.
Some prisoners crafted little wooden rafts in an effort to escape. However, they were just rolled back to the shores by the waves. They were then beaten up by the guards in the bunker.
It's estimated that over 5 decades, the regime arrested up to 150,000 political opponents, with many of them ending up here. Around 20,000 were executed without proper trial, most for the crime of criticizing a corrupt government.
So Chiang Kai-shek's terror really decimated an entire generation of Chinese intellectuals, and it would take Taiwanese society a long time to recover.
But for the people held against their will, their dreams of freedom and liberty didn't die. The suffering only fueled desire for change.
The seeds of democratic Taiwan were also sown by this persecution. One prisoner was kept here for so long and resisted so valiantly, and his struggle had such a profound effect on the course of Taiwanese politics that he became known as Taiwan's Mandela.
In total, Shi Ming-dae spent 25 years locked away. Much of it was here in solitary confinement, and several years of that was on hunger strike.
It's said that he was force-fed over 3,000 times. It's an incredibly invasive process. It involves shoving a tube up your nose and down your esophagus and then pouring in some food from a funnel on top.
So this guy endured all of these things, asked for no mercy, put up with it all, and really became the conscience of Taiwan.
The rule of martial law was eventually lifted in 1987. For the first time in a century, opposition political parties were allowed to form. With that, many of the prisoners still being held were soon released.
And once released, they form this party. They insist on democracy, human rights. They win elections. And Xi Ming-dae is one of the guys who founds the Democratic Progressive Party, the party that now governs Taiwan.
This site continued to operate as a prison. But this time, criminals more deserving of captivity occupied its cells.
Its prisoners were now the gangsters and mobsters who had helped the old regime round up the innocent intellectuals.
In the final years of the 20th century, the prison closed its doors for good. But the trauma experienced here still lives long in the memory of the island's residents.
We must remember that Taiwan once experienced strict political rule. We must learn from the lessons of the past. History might be repeated. If we don't learn, the tragedy might happen again.
In 2002, the Taiwanese government opened the doors of the prison once again, though it now welcomes a very different kind of visitor.
Green Island today is a tourist destination with beaches, hotels, snorkeling, but it's really a reminder of Taiwan's very complex past.
Taiwan's frosty relationship with China continues to this very day. On the one hand, you have Taiwan, a flourishing free market democracy. On the other hand, you have China, one-party communist dictatorship that has never recognized the independence of Taiwan.